is the Abaddon Planet Podcast, episode 25. I am your host, Joel Abaddon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to figure out how to teach better. Today on the podcast, something a little different. I'm going to reflect. During this time of global pandemic, I've been blessed with a little bit of time. So calendar got cleared out with face-to-face meetings. Lots of Zoom meetings are filling those spots, but have a little bit of time to do some reflection that I know I should do. I do it. I just don't do it as well as I should. So really thinking about what has happened with my teaching. What did I not like? What I did like? What would I like to stop? What would I like to start? Where do I need to learn more? All that sort of stuff wrapped up into just a specific, deliberate time to do reflection. And that's professional reflection, professional learning. Thinking about that as a teacher is something that I know if I've got a pre-service teacher, or if I think about a colleague that's, maybe is not starting off with the greatest of abilities, but they've got that ability to reflect. I know that they're going to get better. I know they're going to continue to do that. I know how much reflection has benefited me in the past. And so given this time and given the opportunity to do it, hey, let's do some reflection. So I thought, given the form of this podcast, which is learning how to teach better, why not do that publicly? Why not share that a little bit? So I've got a series of episodes I'm going to be doing. This first one is just thinking about this past year, and that's going to be with my colleague, Bryanna Hall. She's a graduate assistant, former student, and now a graduate assistant. She's a master's student. Well, you'll hear more about her in the episode. And we had an opportunity to teach together this past year. And so one thing I really enjoy about Bryanna is she tells it like it is. And so she's a perfect partner for doing some reflection with. And so we recorded this and thinking about this past year and global pandemic and what that meant for our spring semester, what went on our fall semester, and thinking about basically those things I just mentioned about what happened, what went well, what do we want to start, what do we want to stop. And those sorts of questions guide our conversation together. And so we're going to share that. And then in the future episodes, we're hoping to have a little bit wider amount of time that I'm going to be reflecting on. I actually got a conversation with another former student from 10 years ago and who's been a practicing teacher since then. And so with Brian DeSalvo. So we're going to have that conversation coming up for you in the next episode of the Abaddon Planet Podcast. Before we get into that conversation with Bryanna, I just have to say a few things about the current events that are happening within our country and just the historical significance of this moment in confronting racism. I mean, racism in society, racism in the policing of our society, and even racism in our classrooms, in our teaching, in our school systems. And I have to be honest and say that I've always considered myself someone who promotes equity and diversity in my teaching, but I also know that as a white Christian heterosexual middle-class male that I come from a privileged background. I mean, I always thought in the beginning, I kind of rested on this idea of being, a first-generation college student and have had to fight for all that I had. I worked really hard, some of these narratives that you hear over and over again, but knowing still, when I look back at my schooling, I saw a lot of my math teachers, which is what I wanted to be, were white males. And so having that reinforcement and knowing that if I struggled, I could always lean on that like, hey, well, they made it. People looked at me made it. I could probably do this as well. Or just even the fact that most presidents up until recently all looked like me, right? Had similar sorts of backgrounds. And when you talked about diversity of our presidents, you talked about whether they were, Catholic or not. I mean, that was, kind of my childhood. And so then moving down here to the University of Mississippi and thinking about the significance of racism here and knowing that in 2011, the university was preparing for the 50th anniversary of the integration of campus when a black male, James Meredith, first stepped foot on campus to take classes and just wanted to get an education, right? Something that I didn't think twice about. I was thinking about where do I want to go, not that if a university would actually accept me for who I am, and just based off of my skin color. I can't imagine that. But then in that preparation, you saw some of the pictures and videos of James Meredith bravely walking around in his suit to try to, get into the school of his home state and being turned down. And you look at the yelling faces, the angry yelling faces around him. A lot of them look like my face, right? And so, just feel like this call to address that. And so to think about this idea of anti-racist pedagogy. What does it look like to be anti-racist in my teaching? So, not just, you hear some other things about it. Well, and actually I had an analogy that was given to me that I really like to use in thinking about, society is like a treadmill, right? And because there is inherent racism within society, that treadmill is just going to push people in a direction, right? Because of the systemic racism that's going on. And so if you go with it, if you go with your privilege and you lean on that and you try to use that privilege and you try to use, like racism to forward yourself, you're kind of running with that treadmill, right? And so you're speeding forward. And so even if you say like, you know what, I'm not going to participate in that, and just like you stand still, well, the treadmill's still moving you in a direction, right? Systemic racism still says, you're going to be moving in a direction. And so to be anti-racist means to go against that and to have a, deliberate, intentional action against racism. And so I know that I need to learn more about that. And so I'm trying to learn. I'm feeling this time is a time that a lot of white folks are feeling, is that, it's not a time to talk. It's a time to listen and learn. And so I am really excited about the opportunities that my institution, the University of Mississippi, has put out there to do just that. And so in the School of Education, we are reading this book, Not Light But Fire, How to Lead Meaningful Race Conversations in the Classroom by Matthew R.K. And then also through the broader University of Mississippi, there's another book club on how to be an anti-racist. We're reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And I think a lot of people are reading that book right now because you can't get it on Amazon. You can't get it in your local bookstores like I like to promote. So I had to get the Kindle version, which I'll hang with because I want to read it. But usually I like to, grab those books and underline them and stuff. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to learn, listen to a lot of podcasts as well. A lot of people are putting out some good content out there. And so, and even there's a movie that was shown, again, through my institution, which I don't think you need just to be there. It's The Long Shadow. It's a PBS. It was on PBS. It's a movie on PBS about someone from Mississippi who looks back at her history and finds out that, some of her ancestors were a part of, setting up slavery and setting up basically inherent racism within our society. And so, or setting up systemic racism in our society, as a way of separating folks. And so that was another learning experience. I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes, links to the books, links to that movie. If you're looking to learn a little bit more, listen a little bit more, I can see some future episodes on those two books coming up in the near future, and hopefully find some good partners to talk about that stuff with. But for right now, that's what I'm trying to do, and encourage you all to do the same. So, also, if you have any suggestions for resources on anti-racist pedagogy or any other things that you think would be helpful for folks to listen and learn in order to, again, teach better, and teaching better could be teaching better would be anti-racist pedagogy. That'd be a way to teach better, or any other resources out there. Go ahead and send them to me via joel@amazonplanet.com, or you can do it via social media as well. So there we go. Got a little bit of preview of upcoming episodes. We're going to do some more reflection. We'll be talking about those two books I just mentioned, Not Light But Fire by Matthew K. and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. I like saying these things because now it puts it out there that I have to come back and do it. It might take some time, but we'll get those out there and thinking about how do we take that content and thinking about how to teach better. So without further delay, now on to my discussion with Bryanna Hall as we reflect on a year of teaching. Bryanna Hall, thank you so much for being willing to join me on this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah. And just to be completely clear, we started this about 3 minutes ago, but I forgot to hit record. So fantastic. Let's be completely transparent here. And so what we just got done talking about, and what we'll rehash now that we've hit the record button, is we're doing a series of reflection podcasts, or like I wanted to do a series of reflection podcasts and thinking about let's pause and think back about where we've been and think about how do we get better. Because I think that being a reflective practitioner is something that was hammered in my professional or my preparation as a teacher since the beginning when we had to do portfolios at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so wanted to do a series. So we're going to be talking with Bryanna. Bryanna is a very important person in my life because right now we've been working together as a teaching team. She's a graduate assistant at the University of Mississippi, and we've taught a number of courses through this 2019 through 2020 academic year. But first, let's get a little bit of background. Bryanna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm from Memphis, and I came to Ole Miss in the fall of 2015. I majored in education for elementary grades, and I got certified in K through 8, mild to moderate special education, K through 8 mathematics, K through 12 science, and then K through 6 all subjects, which is built into the elementary education major. And now I'm back at Ole Miss. I graduated in 2019 and started my master's course immediately in the fall of 2019. And so I'm halfway through that program now, and I will graduate in the spring of 2021 with my master's in curriculum and instruction.
Yes. Yeah. And Bryanna has, and we just figured this out, the fall of 2018 is when we first had a class together. Is that right?
Fall of 2017.
2017. Wow. It gets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a junior.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, at fall of 2017, we had a class together that was like the first kind of ed policy class that you take in our program. Mm-hmm. And then elementary math methods, we had that in the next year. And then now we've been teaching together. So it's great Bryanna is a rock star with regards to being a student, and now getting a chance to see her in a teaching role with teaching teachers, teaching early service teachers with myself. And that's been kind of cool to see that development, because sometimes we see you all as students and don't get to, unless we get out in the field, which I never saw you in the field teaching. Unless we get a chance to see that, then there's maybe a little bit of a disconnect there. So it's been awesome being able to see and interact with you, not only as a student, but now as a teacher as well. So, but yeah, and so I'm just thankful that you're now willing to come on the podcast in front of the microphone and say, and let's look back at where we were this year and thinking about the classes we taught, what our intentions were, and what happened. So are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready.
All right. So I sent you some questions, and just kind of using those as a guide to our conversation and thinking back about what did we do? What did we want to do? What actually did happen? And how do we get better? And so my first question was, what is our intention for the classes? And again, we taught a elementary math methods class in the fall, and then we taught a kind of a beginning lesson planning class in the spring. And so, and I guess also a little bit of background too, around spring break. Well, at spring break is when our major disruption in instruction happened in the spring semester. So we transitioned from in-person teaching all of our classes as normal, where students had field experiences and stuff like that in the spring semester, to the after spring break. We had 1 week break in instruction, and then we went to all online, and we finished out the year like that. So that was if you're wondering, that was our kind of COVID-19 sort of transition instruction. So throughout, though, going back to our original question, what was our intention for the classes? And maybe, given that you had them both as a student in the program and then now as a instructor in the program, what do you think the intention for those two classes?
Well, I was thinking about it a couple of days ago, actually, when I was looking through the questions you had sent. And one of the things that kind of dawned on me was, I think our intention kind of changed when coronavirus hit, because when I took the class, it was more of the intention was get you experience in your field placement classroom, get you comfortable up in front of, a class of 15 to 25 students, and let you try out different teaching strategies and techniques as a junior before you go into your full-time placement your senior year. And obviously with coronavirus, they weren't allowed to go into the classroom anymore. And so as I looked back on that, I think our intent kind of switched to just teaching them how to adapt, which is, in my opinion, a very beneficial skill that teachers should have, because whether that's a change in schedule or, a professional development that's thrown in, or a class or grade meeting that comes up unexpectedly, you need to be able to adapt. Your kids are never going to be exactly the same every single day. And so as I reflected, I just kind of thought about, I really think we helped them figure out how to kind of roll with things and adapt to an ever changing situation. And at the beginning of the semester in January, I would have said, oh, they're going to get more comfortable in front of a classroom as a future teacher.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I remember when we had the week to transition our instruction in the spring, and really thinking about, well, what really matters now. And for me, it came down to, we have a way that we teach on how to design instruction, right? It's understanding by design. A lot of schools of education or teacher preparation programs use it. Wiggins and Mateague, it kind of does this backwards design, understanding by design sort of framework, and we use that. And so one of the things that I thought that when we condensed everything down and thought about what was essential, what was the things that need to get stripped away, it really did kind of highlight, like, well, what is the intention? Yes, we do want students to get in comfortable in front of class doing instruction. And if we would have had from the get-go that was going to be our, the way of instruction, it was going to be all online, and we knew that was it. Because when we did transition, we thought, well, maybe we can go back to school, maybe, possibly. And so it was just kind of a temporary sort of thing. And so, having them focus in on how to design instruction, knowing that, okay, there will be other opportunities for them to get in that comfort of leading instruction, and we didn't really have a lot of space in order to do that. So there was that shift. There was definitely that shift. And one of the things that we do in our class that, Bryanna had a chance to experience, and something that I really feel strongly about, is the best way for teachers to learn how to teach is to engage in teaching. And so a lot of the times when, class is running as normal, we would have students do little mini lessons where they're taking whatever content that we're trying to cover within that core or that session of the class, and do a little mini lesson, which we help them design. We call them facilitations. I don't know why. They just evolved to be that way. We call them facilitations. And that seems like a weird word, doesn't it, Bryanna? Like that we call them facilitations?
I mean, kind of, but like, I feel like people always say, as a teacher, you should facilitate the learning, not, control it or dictate it. So I think it kind of works.
All right. Well, hey, thank you. All right. That's good.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And so, like, but sometimes our language in the classroom, like, I want to do a facilitation. What the heck is that? And like, yeah, you're going to teach. And so, and we talk about continuing to facilitate a conversation around the content. And so all of our classes had gotten experience. Every group had gotten experience doing those in the first half of the class. So it felt a little bit more, at least for me, it felt like in the intention that, they still got that experience, and some of them got more experiences in their field experience. But then when we came down to it, the intention was, all right, let's design instruction. But let's back up too. Let's go back to the math methods class that we taught in the fall.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what I know what my intention is, and I'll share it in a second. I'm curious, what do you think our intention was for that class?
I try to look at it, because it was definitely different for me taking the class versus me helping as your GA teach it. When I took the class, I definitely walked into it thinking I'm not going to enjoy doing like math problems every Tuesday and Thursday for an hour and 15 minutes, because I didn't know what to expect from it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to expect from it. Even though I have my concentration in math, and I would say that I'm I'm pretty good at math, I still was nervous about what am I going to take from this if I'm just sitting here working out an equation or something. And I very quickly realized that it wasn't so much about can you solve a math problem and get the correct answer, but can you look at how problems can be approached in different ways and translate that into your student teaching and into your future classroom. And that for me became more and more apparent as we were teaching it in the fall, just looking at how some people were very unsure of their abilities in math. And then as the semester progressed, they didn't necessarily grow to love math, but they grew to feel confident in themselves and how they could teach math. So for me, I would say the intention is to kind of expose people to the thought that it's okay to not know the correct answer as long as you're working towards getting better and improving as a mathematician or just a math teacher. You don't have to have grown up loving math to be a good math teacher. A lot of times, the best teachers are the ones who struggle with the content because they have an understanding of the difficulties that students are facing when they approach a problem that they're not sure about.
Nice. Like that. Yeah. And like having that perspective around, I mean, I really like the way you put that, but just having that perspective that, the only that you don't have to be the person that knows all the answers in order to lead math. And like, and some people say, well, it's easy to teach elementary because, I learned that a long time ago. I'm a master at adding and subtracting, but there is a lot to it. And some of it is like maybe taking away some of that. It's taken away some confidence, but knowing that you don't have to have all the answers, right? It's like, you know what, learning how to add or learning how to count or there's so much more to it than what you think, like that you're not just, doing flashcards and you're not just repeating numbers over and over again. There's so much to it. And like, there's so much richness and stuff that you can do there. And it's not just doing mad minutes or time tests or whatever like that. There's so much to it. But on the same time, like that's part of the wide openness of it, like to see like how many different ways can kids add two numbers together, looking at either using counters or using different strategies or different known facts and like all these different ways. It's kind of fascinating to see like the creativity of kids being able to come out in some of those situations. But the fact is that to go in with it, like I'm going to explore, I'm going to get an idea about what kids can do. And I'm just all I have to do is create an environment for that stuff to happen. And so, one of the things that we encourage and the intention is to expose students to messy problems. And so we talk about messy problems as kind of being those spaces where it could be, wide open spaces where there's lots of different ways to solve a problem, whether it's through different strategies or different ways of interpretation or just, different, problem solving strategies or even communication style or like modeling it or whatever. And so giving access to good tasks and shameless plug on amazonplanet.com/good tasks, you'll find a lot of the sources that we encourage our students to go to where these are vetted sources where you can find what does a good task look like, and getting them exposed to those, getting them to try those out. And again, we give them opportunities to teach in our methods class where they're getting a chance to use some of these messy problems with each other as a way to like try on what does it look like to teach this way. And so for me, I think it's doing exactly what you did, kind of like working on mindset. That's one thing, but then also exposing them to good stuff. Because sometimes, I mean, I know in our some of the courses where you do a lot of math problems with our math department, they have, was it math 245 and 246? Is that those numbers?
Those are like you take them either in your freshman or sophomore year typically.
Yeah, and you're doing lots of math problems. And those are typically the types of problems that we're looking at. But then that was more, you're doing it to learn content. And this one, we're going to be, in our class, you're doing them to learn, okay, what is it behind the problem that you do to teach it? How do we create an environment for messy problems to be successful? And we talk a lot about working in groups, and we talk a lot about opening up your questioning and being letting students know that making a mistake is okay, because mistakes are the bricks in the road that get you towards success. that sort of thing. And so, that, I guess that's my intention as well. So yeah, talking about that mindset from your perspective, but then also exposing them to the types of instruction that we want them to engage in. I never told you this, but I had an email from one of my former students who she went through the entire, she kind of reminds me a lot of you, but she went through my methods class and kind of was one of those, like, thinking I'm like just talking sunshine or, math with sunshine and lollipops and thinking like these messy problems would never work. But then she tried one out in her class. It was like in her second semester, she was full-time student teaching. And for some reason, I don't know why, she said, I'm going to try out one of these messy tasks and messy problems in my math class. And, she had a lot of reluctant learners, and maybe she thought, what could it hurt? And she did it. And she's like, the hands were going up all over the place. Everyone wanted to share their different strategies because they all had different ways of getting at the solution. And then she just became addicted. And she's like, I got to tell Emmett on this. And she sent an email and like, hey, I doubted everything you said in fall semester. But then when I tried it out, and it was like, I saw it. I actually saw it. And that's, I think part of it is trying to a sell job of saying like, hey, go do this, go try this stuff out within your classroom and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes math so intimidating for a lot of educators, especially when they're in their pre-service programs, is because if you were taught math in terms of like this linear style where there is one way to solve the problem and there's one correct answer, I think you're a lot less confident in throwing out a messy type of problem. And you kind of have to break down your former impressions of what you thought math education was in order to then like rebuild with the kind of mindset that you present in your classes. And I do think that it's more beneficial for future teachers and students to have the kind of messy task type of instruction in a lot of ways versus I'm going to write down the formula on the board that we're going to work through how to get the answer, but there is no other way, even if this doesn't necessarily make sense, or if it's one of those rules that expires that then later on down the road is going to confuse a student if they're solely dependent upon that rule that maybe they were taught in second or third grade that now in seventh grade just doesn't work anymore.
Awesome. Kay, can you give an example of a rule that expires just for folks that might not know what you're thinking about or talking about?
Sure. I mean, the one that comes to my mind is FOIL, first, outer, inner, last.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It doesn't always work. It just, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then that's one of the more advanced ones, or else another one is, so there's a series of articles, there's 3 of them, that some math education researchers have put together in through some NCTM journals, National Councils of Teachers in Mathematics, for those of you out there that are not familiar with, our famous nerd organization. These great articles are out there, and one of them, is focusing on elementary. And so like one expiring rule that you have in elementary is you always subtract with the largest number on top, right? We know that that's not true. Anyone that's done a budget and you've come up with a negative number, you didn't put the larger number on top. Your larger number was the thing you were subtracting. And so, or the biggest magnitude from 0. And so, like, thinking about all these rules that expire and we expose them to, these things that all these our student teachers have heard in their math career. And now we're saying like, hey, so if you knew these expired, now what would you do if you go back? What stands out to you? Is that how you're going to share this information, or how do you shade it so that you're not, basically telling a lie in front of your classroom that's what you do, but with all these rules that expire. So we'll post links to that in the show notes. Those are good, and they're free out there. That's a great thing that NCTM is doing, is they've got those out there for free. So that gets it to what happened this year. So let's go back into the fall. What would you say stood out to you, and when you think about that question, what happened this year?
Well, I mean, obviously a global pandemic is the first thing on my mind, but back to the fall, I think just for me, I mean, that was my first semester as a grad assistant, and I was also really nervous. I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but I'm really young to be in grad school. Like, I could have been in the grade below what I was in. So I was 21 when we started courses in the fall, and almost everybody in our classes were also 21. So it just felt weird to be like, hey, I actually need you to, write with correct grammar on your assignments or turn this in on time, because I felt like they were looking at me thinking, you're
Who are
my
you?
age. Why are you bossing me around?
Yeah.
I'm like, I just, I got to do this to get paid. So I need you to just do what you're supposed to, please. And so for the first couple weeks, if not the first month, that was me trying to adjust to that new role that I'd never been in. And then as the semester progressed, just recognizing that a lot of them were growing in ways that I didn't think that they were going to when the semester first started. Like, I saw certain individuals who I thought were going to just give up on their unit or just kind of throw it together last minute. I saw them really become motivated to use those good sources and come up with good tasks for their units. And then what they turned in as a final product was really impressive. And so that kind of just made me rethink how I had looked at things at the beginning of the semester. Just because people were starting out uncertain didn't mean that's how they were going to finish.
That's it. I didn't know that. I knew that, we would have conversations about students and be like, hey, they're struggling a little, but then to have them come through and like that you'd have those, I don't know if it's preconceived notions, but just ideas like, hey, this is the trajectory they're on. And then they kind of surprise you. That's a good thing.
Something would click, and it would all of a sudden it would click with them, and they were like, oh, I can do this. So that was cool to see.
Well, what do you think? Okay. So what do you think led to that? Do you think it was, what I really love seeing is, given your position in the program and the fact that you just had done that course a year before, sometimes people are more apt to, well, most of the time, they're more apt to come to you rather than to me. Especially if there's like, I don't understand what he's, it's, you're just more approachable. And then that happens with a lot of the GAs, and just, you're just grad assistants. You're just more approachable than I am. And so, seeing your interactions with them, do you think that might have led to then the way that you approach them and the way that you're constantly like, you have a high expectation for them and like holding that up, and like, then they're living up to it? Like, what do you think led to kind of those change of trajectories?
I don't want to sit here and say like, yes, it was me. I did it. But I do think that as they realized that maybe the expectations we were putting out for them weren't just to make them miserable. We weren't sitting at home on Sunday afternoon thinking, how can we really torture these students? How can we make their week as difficult as possible? Like, with the color coding objectives and stuff, some of them looked at me like, you've got to be kidding. Why do I have to go back and change this? But then as they went through their unit, they realized, like, oh, this makes sense. It's actually saving me time and potential trouble and struggle to go ahead and do this, because then I can go back through and see where these objectives are throughout my unit and see that they're repeating. So I think part of it was just gaining that time with us and those interactions. But I also think part of it was, as they progressed in the course, a lot of the things that we were asking of them that maybe seemed frivolous or unnecessary at the beginning of the semester suddenly started to make sense as to why we were asking them to do those things, like the community walk. I think a lot of them just thought that we were asking them to go through their communities or their schools where just because we needed a grade to put in the grade book, rather than recognizing that that was something that we really wanted to see influence the unit that they were going to create, later on in the semester.
Yeah. And so just to give a little detail. So we talk about this community walk as, go out, and it's pretty simple. Walk in your community, get some exposure to it. And because the more often than not, sometimes, we're in a fairly large school of education in a very small town. And so there's not enough placements in this town. So the place that they're living is not necessarily the place that they're getting their experience out in the field. And so by having them do a community walk, it's like a minimum of a minimum of exposure to the place that they are teaching and the place that their students live. And because, and the example I always give is the place that you student taught at Water Valley, is you can totally drive down from Oxford to Water Valley and never see downtown, never see where people live, because you just go in off the highway and come right back out and go back up to Oxford. And like to get that exposure and to be able to see, the murals in downtown Water Valley and some of the places people shop and, where the ball fields are and everything that these students experience. And like, how can we then leverage those things within the teaching that we do, so that this unit that they're creating, this instruction they're creating, is actually meant for those students. It's not just something that can be used anywhere, right? That's not good. Like, we want it to be tailored. We wanted them to be able to see themselves in the teaching, or maybe even learn something about their community through the teaching. And so that's the intent. And so I guess, what you're saying is, maybe, they had to trust us a little bit, like, and we have to build up some level of trust that they do it. And eventually they see like, oh, that actually makes sense now. Like, I can actually see, like, it's like, trust us a little bit. And that goes like, what do you think? What do you think it is? Like, because we do have to get them to trust us, because we do ask them to do some things that kind of step them out of their comfort zone a little bit. And I don't know, what are some things that, this might go into the keep thing, the keep question. Like, what are some things that we're doing to kind of help them trust us?
I mean, when I was in that class, one of the things, because you were obviously the professor and Sam was my GA, and one of the things that helped me was just hearing personal experiences and stories that y'all had both experienced, because for me, it was still really new. I mean, that's your first semester in the classroom, full time, all day Monday and all day Wednesday, as opposed to maybe just a couple hours a week. And so for me to build that trust, it took understanding that y'all had gone through some of the things that I was going through, and y'all had faced some of the same uncertainties. And it wasn't just, you're making me do these things because the curriculum in the School of Ed says you need a portfolio, but to actually do it so that I can see later on that I've grown as an educator, that I've grown as a person, and I've grown as a student at the same time. So for me, it just was, you talk about building relationships, and I think that makes a really big difference to a lot of the students.
Yeah, some of those personal experiences and saying like, hey, these things that we're asking you to do, we did them, and now we're seeing the fruits of those things. So like, you're going to see, like, this is something that's already been tried and true, right? That should keep doing that. Mm-hmm. Like, anything else that you think stands out there with regards to building trust, or maybe even, well, actually, let's keep going back. Well, first of all, does anything else stand out with regards to building trust?
For me, I just think there were always like little moments where a story would come up, or, they might ask a question that it's not planned in what we were going to talk about for the day, but it leads to a good conversation, or it leads to a moment where you can reassure them about like what you're experiencing in your classroom is normal. It's not all roses and sunshine 100% of the time. You're going to face struggles, but it's how you react to those struggles, it's how you adapt to them, and it's how you grow from them that makes you a better teacher, not just that you're facing them in general.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes, like, I remember, having some conversations with students, either in front of the whole class or even in one-on-one situations, where they're seeing something that's like, hey, that's really different than what we're talking about in methods class. And, we're talking about equitable instruction, and here I'm seeing something that it's definitely not equitable. Like, it's inequitable. And like, how do I respond to that? How do I stand up to that? How do I do things? And how do I negotiate in a space? Because there's lots of power dynamics going on where we're telling them they need to do something, but they're in a classroom where they need to, someone's giving them space in order to get them experience. And so, I mean, it's a tough dynamic to be almost stuck between a methods instructor and a clinical instructor, where in the field, when they're in their student teaching, and like having those experiences must be hard. And so helping them kind of negotiate those experiences and how do you deal with it? And sometimes it might even be like, you know what, I know that's the experience you're having, and you know that you don't want your future students to have that same experience. And then also to think like, hey, can we not have our students placed in that classroom in the future? But yeah. Speaking of about what else happened, so we go to the spring semester, and what happened there, we already kind of talked about, we transitioned at spring break, but we kind of do some similar things. Like we have them do dot conversations where they post reactions to the readings and things in Google Docs, and then they do a little lesson based off that reading in small groups when they come back, and they take turns doing that. And we did that at the first half, then spring break, and then we go to completely online. Anything else that stands out to you from what happened in the spring semester?
Just that I really wish that they had all gotten the opportunity to do their Teach Live. I think, obviously it's not.
Ooh, describe what Teach Live is for those that don't know.
So Teach Live is, as far as I know, it's relatively unique to the University of Mississippi School of Education, but it's this virtual simulation where you are the teacher. So you either get a lesson, depending on where you are in the program, you either have a lesson provided for you to teach, or you have to write that lesson yourself. And you go in on a scheduled day and time, and there are 5 students that are portrayed by actors somewhere else out in the universe. They never really tell you where. Some people think it's Florida. I don't know if it's Florida. I don't know where they are. But you teach those students the lesson that you've prepared, and they intentionally try to kind of throw you off your game, and it gives you really good practice in learning how to react, respond, and adapt to students and to situations that you weren't necessarily expecting or prepared for.
Yeah, they even go so far as to, one student tries falling asleep, one student might try doing text messaging, and then there's, students that are a little fidgety. There's another student that, likes to give answers all the time. They all have their unique personalities. And so
I had one curse.
Oh, go ahead. What?
I had one curse in my
all right,
which was definitely unexpected. So.
Yeah. So I mean, some of it is like on classroom management, but the other side is like, well, how do I? It's a difference between writing a lesson and enacting it, right? And where the rubber meets the road, and seeing what happens there. And so having that experience and knowing that, hey, there is going to be this learning curve about how to adapt and how to use the energy of the classroom, and not just go in and ask my closed-ended questions, execute a lesson, and then exit, and never having interacted, never having adapted to what was given to me in the classroom. And so what's great is Dr. Brady, who runs the Teach Live, also provides videos of their teaching, so that we can then, the student teachers can watch them, but then also we can watch it with them. And that's something we were trying to do in the spring, but because everyone wasn't able to do Teach Live, we only got a few of them. I think I talked through like 3 or 4 different people. I don't know, how many did you talk with, Bryanna?
I talked to 2. One person I talked to before spring break, and so we actually got to sit together and watch it. And then the other one, I watched it in advance, and then we talked through it together on a Zoom call. Yeah.
And usually those are pretty eye-opening, like, conversations for the student teacher. And the fact is, like, you probably saw something that they didn't see, and they're like, it's like this, you're starting to reveal these lenses of what does it mean to look at it, something like a teacher, because still teacher candidates are still students, and they still sometimes act like students. So that's what's, like, yeah, I did it, but did you do it like a teacher? Did you do it like a student? Like, did you do it, I just got my A, or did I do it and get better as a teacher? And so, like, pointing out some things, a lot of things that I'll point out to them is like, what kind of questions are you asking? Are you asking closed-ended questions or open-ended questions? Why are you looking at your notes the whole time? Do you not know the content going into it? And like, some of them are fairly simple things, but some things like get to it like, hey, you said all this stuff. Why couldn't you just ask the question and see if they could send it? Do you think that one of those students knows the answer? Like, yeah, well then there's a great article I love to reference all the time is Don't Say Anything a Kid Can Say. And, like, if that answer is out there and you can, get someone to say it, why should you say it? And so that's what's kind of interesting, is to get them to start thinking in a little bit different ways through those experiences. So yeah, that's stuff that we didn't get a chance to have everyone get a conversation with us about Teach Live, because that's kind of it is, again, a unique experience that they get to do. But they all, I think about half probably got to do it, I believe. Maybe more. I don't know. But a number of them.
I'm not sure.
Okay. So we had that. We had the Teach Live experiences. Anything else happened in the spring besides, again, global pandemic?
I mean, that's the one that sticks out the most to me.
Yeah. Well, and also, I guess when we transitioned to online, what we did was created online modules that walk through the Understanding by Design sort of planning process where everyone is developing their unit. And then something that we did is split the class in half and basically had one-on-one conversations at least once every other week, which was, I think, really helpful. Like, I really, really like that. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they would have been. Oh, go ahead.
No, what did you think about those?
I thought they were really helpful. I can't imagine personally having to write, because this was their first UBD, this was their first unit. I can't imagine having to try to navigate writing the first unit online, through Zoom classes and things like that. For me, my junior year, I really needed that in-person instruction. It's what helped me kind of understand each component of the UBD. So I think that without the one-on-one meetings, I'm really not sure what would have happened. I think we would have had the majority of the classes be quite confused, because there were things that, even though they're said in the modules that we created and they're explained, in a reading or an online resource, they weren't clicking until they heard, either myself or you say, no, you need to do this. Like, think about it from this perspective. Don't focus on any other part of it. Just like work on your objectives right now. Don't think about what activities you're going to do, or, how you're going to have a new performance task. Just focus on your objectives. Find the DOK level, because we require them to put that for depth of knowledge. And once you get those honed in, that's when you can start building out from there. A lot of them, I think, would have tried to kind of do rough drafts for the whole thing at one time, instead of, for me, I think it's better to have each part be solid and good before you try to move on to the next section, the next phase of the unit. Because if your objectives aren't solidified, if they don't fit the content and the standard, you don't need to write a lesson plan for them, because they're not going to work for what you're saying you're going to teach.
Yeah. It was almost like we're watching, one of the things we're watching as a family, or my wife and I are watching, is like an old season of The Amazing Race. And like, did you ever watch The Amazing Race, Bryanna?
I did. I used to watch it, yeah.
So like how they have to go through those checkpoints, they have to do the one thing before the other. And it felt like the students that were successful kind of did those checkpoints, right? They didn't get ahead of themselves. Mm-hmm. You can't go ahead and do the next part of the race until you do the one that's right in front of you. And those that did that, like, they solidify, all right, I know what standard I'm going to teach, from the standards for teaching that they have for the state of Mississippi. And then from that standard, they broke it down into objectives. And that was like the next checkpoint. And then from there, let's design our assessments. And we do that next to say, like, okay, what's going to show that they've got evidence of learning these things? Let's do these assessments. And now we go in to write a lesson. It's almost like, well, what's going to be the things that I'm going to do that's going to lead them to perform well on these assessments? And again, those assessments could be traditional tests or quizzes, but we also have them do a performance task, something sort of authentic, that they have a rubric in order for evaluating. And it's really kind of neat when you get to that point, because you have something like, they're designing an assessment and they say, hey, this assessment does these objectives. And then you can look at the assessment and say, how in the world are you, like, let's say, defining these terms? You never ask them anything about definitions, or there's nothing in there that would cause them to even recite a definition or, use them or whatever. And it's like, oh, like, oh, the assessment has to actually match the objectives. It seems silly, but like you'd have these like aha moments where you're like, oh, okay. It's like, you have to like literally point it out when you say it before, like, yeah, those should be in alignment, and they nod and smile and like no questions about it. But the actual one-on-one session where you can actually point that out, where it's in context, they have thought about that assessment, they have thought about those objectives, and now they get to see that when they put them side by side, they do not match. And it's like, okay, now how do I make them match, right? How do I, adapt them, and how do I do that? And so walking them through that process, it's like, that's so valuable. When I think sometimes, and this is on my own teaching, like sometimes it'd be like, yeah, go do that. And they go off and do it. And we didn't have as intensive one-on-one sort of interactions. And so when they come back and it's not done, and I'd get upset, and it's like, well, how did I help that? How did I structure that? How could I have been better about that rather than just sending them off? And I think we really saw that from the fall semester, which we're seniors, and the junior semester. So the fall semester was seniors, and a lot of them are interacting with you around their units, and you probably talk to people over and over and over again around their units.
Oh, yeah.
Versus in the spring, it felt more systematic and more shared too amongst us as well. So I think it seems like the way we did in the spring seemed much, much better.
I also think it was helpful that in the spring, this was their first exposure to a UBD, to writing a unit, whereas in the fall, they had already gone through their junior year, so they had written that one in the spring of junior year. And so a lot of them came into senior year with the mindset of, well, that's not how we did it last year, or, I thought that my assessment in my junior year UBD was good. Why can't I do it the exact same way for this UBD that we're doing in our methods class? And it was kind of having to say, like, it was good for your first unit, but you should be working to get better.
Yeah,
and
let's get better.
It doesn't fit what you're trying to do now. Like, you've got to, again, adapt. I really feel like that's a key word for both courses. But so kind of in the same way that we had to break down the walls and the mindset of just because you learned math in a static way of one equation, one answer, and that's it, doesn't mean that's how math should be taught. We kind of also had to do the same thing with the UBD, saying just because this is how you did it last semester, like, don't narrow your focus to only be able to think about, well, this is what I did last semester, and these are the resources I use. We're asking you to find good sources, so maybe expand your horizons a little bit in that area, or, different parts of the UBD, stuff like that.
Yeah, with the metaphor that I like to use is, I think it's metaphor, is the places where they go to find the good tasks, right? Is the established restaurant versus the place that they Google, because they just Google the standard and find some random blog or something that has a math task, like, oh, that looks cute, and they've got a nice, it's a pretty worksheet that goes along with it. And it's like, that's like the sushi cart on the corner, right? You don't know, unless you've been here for a long time and you've got experience, you don't know anything about that sushi cart. You want to go to the established restaurant to eat sushi and not just some random cart, right? And so having them, expand their horizons and find good stuff in order to use, and convincing them that you need to be flexible, you need to adapt. Because also too, what we're preparing them for is if, our students get hired. That's what's great. Well, when they get hired and they go to some place that's, and then like, hey, here's how our unit plan, and like, that's great. We don't do it like that here, or here's the way that we do it, and you need to adapt. And it's like, if all we teach them is not the process, and is we just teach them how to just do the same process over and over again, then we're kind of setting them up for disaster.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
All right, so let's get into the final three here. So something to keep doing, I'm going to say something to stop doing, and what's something we need to start doing. So let's start with keep. What do we need to keep doing?
For me, in the class that we taught in the spring, I think we need to keep having them work on a group UBD. I think if we started it, maybe the second or third week of class, we could get them through a completed unit as a group before spring break. And then that way, when they go on spring break, they've got that experience. They didn't complete it entirely on their own, which is totally fine, but they've seen what each step of the UBD looks like. So when they go to write their own, maybe some of the confusion or the misconceptions that were created by them being on their own, working independently away from the classroom this semester, won't be there when they're, working on their 5 or 10 day unit independently.
Yeah, and I think I would say also keep doing it with regards to the, hey, today we want you as a group to be done with, your standard selected. You got your objectives broken down, like walk them through like the Amazing Race sort of perspective and like almost set them up. Like, because I think we were like, hey, let them go at their pace and then see where they're at versus like, no, you should be done with this today. Because I think sometimes, they're good students. A lot of times those that want to be teachers, we're good students. So they want everything to be perfect. And it's like, you got to be perfect. That's great. But you've got time constraints too. And you just need to, you're not even going to know if it's good until you actually try it. So you're going to have to just, let's get done with this stuff. Right. So keep going with the group unit. We could also do that in our math methods class too. Don't you think?
Yeah,
do a group
I think
unit.
so.
Because again, getting them to adapt, getting them to find good stuff and walk through that process, that could be good. I would say also too, the checking in one-on-one, like almost mandatory, like once every 2 weeks, especially once we get into having them develop things or, sort of the final project sort of perspective. Like, I think those one-on-one check-ins, like mandatory to see where they're at is good as well. Because, you hear something or you might learn something about, hey, there's struggles in their personal life. So, hey, how do you navigate that? Versus, just there's questions that they wouldn't come up to you and ask. It just provides an opportunity. And so, I don't know, what do you think about keeping those one-on-one check-ins?
I definitely think that they were helpful. And we could even do them to where it's not necessarily a Zoom meeting or something, but where we have, after the group has facilitated, like there's, 10 minutes or something, maybe for like the last 30 minutes of class, you could have 3 meetings like with me or something, and they come up and just kind of talk through their progress and where they're at. Because one of the things with the Zoom meetings was just that not only are they online, but with class being online, it was sometimes hard to track people down and to get them to show up to the meeting. And so, once they're out of our sight, sometimes it's like, oh, I don't actually have to go to that. So there's some people that I think would really benefit from a one-on-one face-to-face type of meeting, because it's a lot harder to avoid us if they've been in class and they're supposed to meet with us.
Yeah.
You can't really get out the door, versus if they were supposed to show up to an online class but didn't, then they don't show up to the online meeting. If they didn't do those 2 things, are they going to really care to respond to an email? Maybe not. So like the face-to-face, like, I see you, I know that you are here. What progress have you made? Do you have any questions? I think could be beneficial to some people.
Yeah. Well, then maybe it's just being open to, hey, we'll have some online, we'll have some face-to-face, and, whatever works best for some, like, oh, I guess, you didn't sign up for an online, so I guess we're meeting face-to-face today. So, if we have them available. I think that also goes, okay, so yeah, let's keep doing. What do we want to stop doing?
I don't know. The one thing that stands out to me that I feel like people have struggled to complete both semesters in the fall and the spring would be the readings being due Monday at noon and Wednesday at noon. For some reason, like, it just, with some people, it never clicked. So I kind of thought about, I wonder if we could do it to where they were due, like both sets were due Wednesday at noon or something. So they just had one due date for the readings and responses to remember each week. And then, like, for the facilitation, they wouldn't necessarily have that feedback to go off of, but I'm not sure how many times the groups this semester were really utilizing the feedback from the reactions and extensions. So maybe just cutting down on the it should be due Monday at noon and Wednesday at noon, because for some reason it just never got through to some people, no matter how many times I said it or sent an email about it.
Like, hey, yeah. And so like what we're saying is like we had these readings. It was basically kind of the daily work of the class. And so these readings would then, they would react to them in a Google Doc. And then they'd also do an extension where they would go, oh, this reading made me think of something. I want to go find that answer. I want to go find a resource that can help me answer that thing. Or, you know, it made me think, like, I want to share something that I heard from my field experience or whatever. So they have reactions and extensions, and then they would have, we would have the facilitations that would be the mini lessons based off each reading on Monday. On Tuesday and Thursday, our classes on Tuesday and Thursday. So in order to have the information, we would make the readings due on Monday and Wednesday. And so as I'm saying this, and as Bryanna just explained, it's probably complicated. So if we just said, hey, all the readings are due Monday at noon for the week, that probably makes sense, even though it's way before the Thursday class. We simplify it down to one due date. It's really clear. It's like, I've got to do my readings on Sunday, or I got to do them whenever to get them to do on Monday. It also, for our seniors, it clears up their week. So because they've got field placement on Monday and Wednesday. And so just saying like, hey, you're going to be busy anyway on Wednesday. You might as well get it done beforehand. So maybe by design, we can help offload some of that work and say, hey, you're going to have all your readings done beforehand, and then you won't have to worry about them during the week. Oh, that's not bad. That's a good thing.
Especially because I feel like it would be the ones that were due on Thursday that really kind of got the short end of the stick, because we would have class on Tuesday and Thursday. So the ones for Tuesday were due Monday at noon, but they had Thursday afternoon, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning to get the Tuesday ones done. But when they would leave class on Tuesday, they would go home and forget about it. Then they would student teach on Wednesday. Wednesday at noon would come before they knew it, and then it would be late, or they would forget about it. And there were some people that if they missed the deadline, they just would throw it out altogether and not do it, even though what we were asking them to read would have been beneficial to their learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also then reduces the times that people have to, you know, because we would have them help check on that, or do a checklist of the who did it or not. And then that would help inform also what did people struggle on, so they could kind of take an assessment of, you know, what were people talking about in the doc conversation. So that would help other things as well. So that's a good one, Bryanna. I like that. You know, and this is the thing. It's not like that it's been the first semester or first time that people struggled with the midday or midweek due date. And it's like, why don't we actually do something about it? So that's good. Well, let's do that. And then we'll have an explanation if like, hey, why do we have to do this Thursday reading way before? And it's like, well, this is why. Okay. Anything else to stop? So what really stood out to me from the 353 was looking at like what was actually important. And I think I kind of want to take that same perspective in the fall, because who knows what's going to happen in the fall, and thinking about, well, what is the actual important stuff? If we're going to do the same thing, like we started in like halfway through the semester and all of a sudden we're going to leave, which, you know, could happen, and stay home for instruction, or maybe it's vice versa. We're home and then we come together in October. I don't know. Who knows right now? What is the essentials to online instruction look like, or what's the essential part of our instruction? So I think, you know, we stopped some assignments in our spring, and is to look at basically the math methods class with that same lens and think about what's important. If we had to turn around and turn this into modules, and what would I take out, and like question myself, well, if I could take it out for that, is it really important? Does it need to be in the course? And so I don't really have an answer for it, but it's just of what specifically to take out, but to think like, if we had to do that, what would I want to take out? And so that means like, is there something that's busy work? And we've done that before. I mean, given that you took the class 2 years ago, that we've talked about that with regards to, hey, this assignment, we're going to take that out. Like, that seems like busy work. And we've done that. And we were different than other sections of the course, and maybe got a little bit of trouble for that. But anyway, we took something out, and it was like, they were like thankful. They were thankful for it. The fact that they weren't doing this busy work that other folks were, and really trying to focus in on that. And so maybe there's more of that sort of thing that we can take out, because we know that senior year, that senior fall semester is tough, is a tough one. There's lots going on. So what do you want to start doing? So something new. What do you want to start doing? What's that?
This could just be, I was thinking about, like, I feel like a lot of people have had, I don't want to call it trauma, but I don't know what else to call it. I mean, I've never experienced anything like this pandemic in my lifetime, and I hope I don't experience another one anytime soon. And I just feel like for a lot of people, it wasn't so much the struggles academically to get through, but it was the struggles emotionally or mentally to get through.
Yeah.
And I know that senior year is really difficult for a lot of people. If they don't take the 2 methods courses in the summer, they're student teaching all day Monday and Wednesday. Then they're in class from 8 to 4 on Tuesday and Thursday. And then they do have Friday off, but they're doing their work. It's not a laid back kind of semester for them. So I kind of was thinking about, when I student taught, we would have them journal their feelings. And yes, they were first graders, but just like that kind of cathartic release of, you can write down how you're feeling. It's not going to be looked at by your university supervisor in your portfolio. It's just literally, you had a bad day student teaching, you're having a bad day with this or that, and give them maybe like 5 minutes at the beginning of class once a week, or however often we want to do it, just to write down their thoughts and their feelings and any concerns they might have about the class in general or about senior year. And then if they want those thoughts and feelings to be looked at, read, and responded to by us, they can leave them with us. And if not, they can take it with them when they go.
That's good. Yeah, that's definitely something. I know my friend Jen Wolf down in Arizona, she does a lot of check-ins. She does like teaches math content courses. She does that well, and I could check in with her, see what she does with check-ins. I like the journaling idea too, and see what she does for her check-ins, because that's something that's important to me. I mean, like, I'll do little stump speeches in front of classes. Sometimes I talk about mental health, because I know that's something that's been really beneficial for me lately, is you kind of paying attention to that, getting over the I'm tough and I can take care of myself and I don't need any help, to, you know what, we could all use a little help. And so that's definitely, I like that. The social, it's especially, we saw that in the spring, right? Where, hey, people had time, people had stuff, but they were still struggling. And there was some other things going on. Obviously, this other stresses going on, where you're worried about your family, you're worried about yourself, you're worried about your job, and or you just even worried about, like, the world, And so one thing about there's the Center for the Healthy Mind at the University of Wisconsin. They do some research with regards to mental health of teachers, because they know good, healthy teachers are going to lead to good, healthy students. And so helping our students helping our student teachers be able to take care of themselves is going to be beneficial, not just for them, but for their future students. Awesome. I like that. One thing. Oh, go ahead.
I just was going to say, I think it's a lot easier sometimes for people to write something down than to say it out loud. Because I think a lot of times people view it as it's a weakness, and it's not a weakness at all. But if you are able to write it, as opposed to having to, like, approach you or me and say, this is how I'm feeling, and you can just you can hand us a sheet of paper with it written on it, it kind of provides that protection for some people that I think would be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sometimes you want to, like, you see someone that's not doing their work or doing something, like, oh, you're having these other thoughts about, like, why are they not doing their work? And then why are they, like, don't they care about this stuff about, and, like, yeah, maybe they really, really care. But they're such in a place where they can't even respond and send an email or reach out to something. But as soon as you open the door and you say, hey, this is the space for this to happen, for this communication to happen, and all of a sudden, like, it just becomes really easy to take this piece of paper where they poured out their heart and slide it over to you. Like, I really like that idea, Bryanna. That's a good one. See, this is, if nobody listens to this episode, I know that I've got, like, a list now of things. This is great. So for
My
me,
mom will listen to it.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right. Thanks to Mom. One thing I want to do is I'm reading a book, and you can't see it because you're in the boonies, and we want our audio connection to be pretty good. I'm reading a book right now called Not Light But Fire: How to Lead Meaningful Race Conversations in the Classroom. One of our graduate students is leading a book club for this summer, and we're talking about this book. And I mean, given the events of this week, I mean, this is Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yesterday was Blackout Tuesday, and where people were pausing in social media and things like that, and talking about the murder of George Floyd, and like, what does that mean for us as a society? What tipping point have we got to? And I think that we just need to be more bold. I'll say it, bold in having these conversations. One of the things that we'll do at the beginning of our 403 class, our math methods class, is have people draw a mathematician. And a lot of time they're drawing me. And, a lot of time the class is full of white, middle-class female, just like yourself. And but we're teaching to classrooms that are represented by more than just us, right? That the classrooms that we're teaching in don't necessarily look like the classrooms that we are teaching teachers in. And so what does that mean? How do I have to open up? What do I think, does it mean to be competent in mathematics? What does it mean to address some of these issues that need to be there? And as you can hear, I'm struggle with my words. And so how do we talk about that well? Because and that's why I'm reading the book. But just thinking about how do we address these things so that we as teachers can be an answer and not part of the problem.
Yeah, I definitely think you shouldn't avoid something just because it makes you uncomfortable. I don't have the right words to talk about it right now, but just because I don't have the words doesn't mean that I shouldn't talk about it. It doesn't mean that it's not important and worthy of being discussed. And I think a lot of people kind of shy away from conversations about race because it is one of those things where you don't want to say something offensive. You don't want to say something that could be misconstrued. And so it's easier for a lot of people to just say, well, I don't feel, prejudice or, racism towards people, so I don't need to have that discussion. But you really do, because you're going to be in a classroom full of students who are of all different races, backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, and you need to be prepared to have those discussions because, there's a lot of children out there right now who know what happened to George Floyd, and if they were in the classroom, there's a huge possibility that they would ask their teacher, why it happened or what could they do. And if you're blindsided by that, you might not be as equipped to have, a good and appropriate response. And it might kind of take you aback if you haven't thought about those conversations and had them as a pre-service teacher. So yeah. I think that's important.
Well, and some work that I've been involved with, they started talking about, towards the end of it, we started talking about anti-racist pedagogy and what does that look like? So anti-racist teaching. And so you think about it, like society as it is, as it's set up, you look at the inequities that exist. It's like a treadmill, right? And it's going in the way towards whatever, white supremacy or racism, right? And so if you can go with that, and you could be, you run with it, and that's being racist, is going with the flow and keep going. That's one way. Or you can say well, I'm neutral, right? So that means you stand still on the treadmill. But what does that still mean? You're still moving in that way, mm-hmm. right? You're still by inaction and saying, I don't, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not racist. Yeah, you might not be, but you're still within a society has racist things within the structures that exist in it. And so then anti-racist means I've got to go against it. I've got to act. I've got to do things. And so one of the things I like about Blackout Tuesday is let's learn. It's about learning. It's about being quiet. It's about learning. So it's about reading books. It's about listening to some things. There's a podcast that I listened to today from the Bill Simmons Report. It's on, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a former math teacher, and he's putting together some data on certain practices. I think there's 8 practices or 8 policies that if police forces adopt them, they're just statistically shown to get better. And by getting better, less violence towards Black men, or people, African Americans. And so that seems to be okay, there's some things that I can promote, right? There's some things that I'm learning already and already seeing like how mathematics is a part of that. And so what does that look like in my math methods classroom? I don't know yet, but I think it's something that we just can't ignore anymore. Teachers are so powerful. We have an opportunity to do it. So like, why are we shirking that or why am I'm not talking about why am I shirking that responsibility? I need to be, I think there were some things that I was doing, but I think I need to do more. And so I'll put it on myself. I need to do more. So I think we did pretty good. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Yeah,
to brag, but I thought my ideas were really great.
Oh, I love it. So this is, Bryanna is one of my favorite people. Like she's always honest. She's always someone that's willing to share. And I was just really glad that Bryanna, that you were willing to come on and try this little different type of podcast episode with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, if only your mom watches it, it's a thanks to your mom for listening so far.
So, she'll really appreciate the shout out. So Mom, if you do listen, you got to get to the end to get your shout out, but
there you go.
I mean, that's your reward. So
Awesome. Thanks, Bryanna. So glad that Bryanna was willing to join me on the podcast. She talks about how young she is, and there's a lot of wisdom in her, in just her short amount of time here on this earth. But she's a great partner to have with regards to teaching, and I'm so glad that she is chosen to do her education, further her education here at the University of Mississippi, and I've had a chance to teach with her. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to doing it another year. And now, after having done this reflection and thinking about what we can do to improve our teaching going forward, I think we're going to have a really good shot at doing some really good stuff this next year. Especially, again, thinking about all the different ways we need to adjust our teaching, and thinking about resiliency, and thinking about how do we best support the learning that's going to go on. I think what we did here in this episode is going to help us do that. So I'm glad we did it. So that is all I have for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, you can subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download, which sends out resources like some of the things I mentioned at the early part of the podcast. Some of those books, the Not Light But Fire book, I've mentioned in a recent sharing of the Amazon Planet download. If you want to do that, you can join the email list by going to AmazonPlanet.com. There's a link at the top, link throughout the pages to join the email list. You can also do it via the Amazon Planet Facebook page as well. So, which you can also follow the Amazon Planet Facebook page. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all at the handle at Amazon Planet. You can also check out the Amazon Planet store or the Amazon Planet bookshop with links in the footer at AmazonPlanet.com, where your purchases support the production costs of the podcast. Again, if you're looking for show notes for this episode, you can go to AmazonPlanet.com/episode 25. There you will find all the different links that we mentioned here today on the episode of this podcast. And hopefully if we get some resources shared, I'll keep adding those to that page as well. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Thanks to Bryanna Hall for sharing her time and observations on this year in teaching. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.